Okay, good evening, everybody. Again, happy third night of Hanukkah. Hope you guys are having a wonderful, wonderful holiday. We're here tonight. I promise I won't keep you guys too long. Keep you from your Hanukkah festivities, whatever you may choose to do. I won't keep you too long. Tonight we're going to be studying the Torah Parsha Mikeitz, which is, if my memory serves me correct, it's Genesis chapter 44, verse 1. I'm sorry, verse 41, verse 1 through chapter 44, verse 17. Now, before I begin, it's a custom of mine. I always like to say a blessing before we study. So if you'd like to say this blessing with me, please feel free. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadishanu b'mitzvotav v'asot b'divrei Torah. Okay, and with that, let's jump right into this, our Torah Parsha Mikeitz. Okay, like I said, in the spirit of keeping things brief tonight, so as not to take up too much of your time, I'll just review the story in a nutshell here. It begins with Joseph is still in prison. Okay, and these events, these are all setting the stage for what will eventually lead all of the Jews at the time to eventually find their way down and be living in and amongst the Egyptians in Egypt. And this will eventually lead to what becomes the 400 years of slavery and bondage of the Jews in Egypt. And as we ultimately know, this bondage will be eventually broken by God, through Moses in the Exodus story, which we should be coming up on starting in a few weeks from now. So, as I said, Joseph's imprisonment, was wrongfully imprisoned. It finally ends when, during the course of one night, Pharaoh has two dreams. He dreams of 7 fat cows that they come up out of the water of the Nile and are feeding on the reed grass around the Nile, and they're followed by 7 lean, skinny, gaunt, sickly cows, and the skinny, gaunt, sickly cows, they swallow up the 7 fat, healthy cows. And then later on in the night, he has another dream where he sees 7 fat, healthy ears of grain all growing from the same stalk. And these 7 ears of grain are followed by 7 lean, sickly-looking ears of grain that the Torah describes. They look like they had been hit by the hot winds from the east. They were really, really famished and malnourished looking. And these 7 ears of grain, the 7 sickly-looking ones, they swallow up the 7 healthy ears of grain. Now, Pharaoh has nobody to interpret these dreams for him. He summons all of his magicians in Egypt and all of the holy men of Egypt, all of his priests and everything of their religion. Nobody can interpret his dream, and he's really, really disturbed by this. At this point, we have his cupbearer who was imprisoned with Joseph. Okay, he remembers at this time, although it was 2 years later after he makes this promise, he remembers of the promise that he made to Joseph that if, in return for Joseph interpreting his dreams, if he gets out and gets restored to his position, that he would make mention of Joseph to Pharaoh, that, Joseph was wrongly imprisoned and that, he can interpret dreams. Well, this jogs the cupbearer's memory. He finally remembers this and says to Pharaoh, when I was imprisoned, myself and your baker, you had us imprisoned, and we both had dreams in one night, and we were lamenting because there was no one there to interpret them. But in the cell with us, there was a Hebrew named Joseph who he had the ability to interpret dreams, and the way he interpreted our dreams, exactly what he said came to pass. He told me that I would be freed from the prison and restored to my position as your cupbearer, and then he told the baker that he would be taken from the prison and impaled upon the stakes and put to death. And he's like, these things happened exactly. So Pharaoh has Joseph brought from the prison. They take him to get cleaned up, cut his hair, dress him in fine clothes and everything, so he's befitting to come before Pharaoh. And Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh says to him, it's been told to me that you can interpret dreams. And Joseph again gives credit to God and says, not I, but God can interpret your dreams for you. Joseph interprets the dreams to mean that the fat, healthy cows and the fat, healthy grains mean 7 years of plenty that is about to befall the land of Egypt, and that these 7 years of plenty will be then followed by a terrible famine and 7 years of hunger. And Joseph advises Pharaoh to store grain and food and all produce and everything as much as can be done all through the 7 plentiful years, so that when the famine hits, the 7 years of famine hit afterwards, that everyone will be able to eat, and Egypt won't die. You'll be able to survive not the plague, the famine. There we go. Okay, so Pharaoh is so impressed by this that he basically appoints Joseph as like the Lord Governor over all of Egypt. Okay, basically every Egyptian is to answer to Joseph for everything. Basically, there's no person in Egypt at this point higher than Joseph, with the exception of Pharaoh. And as Pharaoh says, except for reasons of the throne, that's the only reason that I'm higher than you. So basically, Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of all of Egypt, and Joseph spends the next years, going up and down Egypt to all the cities of Egypt, making sure that they're storing produce and storing enough grain and everything, so that when the 7 years of famine hits, that Egypt will still have food and be able to survive and basically won't die. And the Torah tells us that so much was saved and so much was stockpiled that all the storehouses and warehouses and silos and everything were all filled to the ceiling, and that so much was stockpiled and so much was saved that it was so much that Joseph was unable to count it because it was so much. So Egypt is successfully prepared for the famine to come by stockpiling everything that was produced when the 7 years of abundance and plenty hit, because the Torah tells us that the ground opened up and that produced so much during those years. Now, during this time too, Joseph is also given a wife, and he marries a woman named Asenath, who's daughter of Potiphar, who was a priest of On, as the Torah tells us. And with her, he has 2 sons, his son Manasseh and Ephraim. So, moving on, the famine hits throughout the nation, and it hits throughout Egypt and pretty much the known world at the time. It's everywhere, and it's really, really, really bad. And it comes to be known to Jacob in his home in Canaan, because the famine's even spread that far. It comes to be known to Jacob that food can only be obtained in Egypt. So he sends 10 of Joseph's brothers down to Egypt to purchase grain. Leaving behind, Jacob keeps his youngest son. Is Potiphar related to Potiphar? I'm honestly not totally sure. In one of my Torahs, it says that yes, he is, and I was listening to, because I also have a JPS Torah on my iPod, and I was listening to that earlier today, and it makes no mention of him at all. From what I found notes from Chabad.org on this as well, and that's what it says. It says, Potiphar, the same name as the man who had purchased Joseph as a slave. I'm honestly not too sure about that, if he's related to or is the exact same man. One source suggests yes, another source, another interpretation of the Torah, is a little bit more ambiguous about it. So I'm not totally sure, Jonathan. So we have the 10 brothers going down to Egypt to purchase grain. Now Jacob withheld. Indeed, good midrash fodder indeed, Joseph. I mean Jonathan. Geez, I got Joseph stuck on the brain here. So, anyways, like I said, the 10 brothers go down to Egypt to try and purchase grain, and Jacob keeps his youngest son Benjamin behind because for fear that what would happen to him. He's fearing for his safety. Now, when the brothers come before Joseph, Joseph immediately recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. They don't recognize that it's their long lost brother who they wronged so many years before, and plot to kill him. Then nah, you know what? We shouldn't kill him. We shouldn't spill his blood. So toss him into a pit, leave him there to die. And then you know what? Let's not leave him to die. Let's make some money off this. So let's sell him to these Ishmaelites coming from Midian on their way down to Egypt. Let's sell him to those. Now, of course, they didn't recognize Joseph. To him, they see him and oh, this is the Lord Governor of Egypt. Okay. But Joseph immediately recognizes them, and the Torah tells us that, several times he has to disappear and hide his face because he's overcome with emotion at seeing them and, unbeknownst to the other brothers, having been reunited with each other. So Joseph accuses the 10 brothers of being spies, and he accuses them saying that, that you're spies from a foreign nation and you've come to see Egypt at her worst. With the famine, you've come to see the land in its nakedness. They insist that they're being truthful and that they're being honest. And so to prove this, Joseph insists that they bring Benjamin back, that they come back again, and they bring their youngest brother Benjamin with them, because Joseph had been asked a lot about. He's asked them about their home, asked them if their father was still alive, if he was still well, asked them of their youngest brother who wasn't there, and he asked them to come back again and to bring Benjamin with him this time. And he says that, this will prove to me that you are who you say you are, and then I won't think that you're spies anymore. And to ensure this happens, he takes their brother Simeon and holds him kind of as a hostage. Now, of course, he doesn't treat Simeon bad, but he creates this ruse that they're going to blindfold and bind Simeon, and that basically they're taking like a hostage of war. He creates that whole ruse to make it more believable, for his other brothers. So he takes Simeon as a hostage, and later on the brothers then discover that the money they had paid for their provisions, which Joseph had sent back with them to their home at Jacob's home in Canaan, they discovered that the money that they paid for their provisions had mysteriously been returned to them. So back in Canaan, the brothers tell Jacob of everything that goes on, and that they have to come back and bring Benjamin with them. And there's a little period of hemming and hawing that goes around, oh, what do we do? Are we being punished? What should we do about this? Jacob doesn't want to send Benjamin back, but they're like, look, we have to take Benjamin with us, or else, number one, we're not going to be able to get any more supplies from this guy down in Egypt. And number two, if we show up with him again, he said, do not let me see your face again unless you have your brother Benjamin with you. If we show up again and we don't have him with us, he's going to think we're spies, and then he's going to take us as slaves or whatever, and we're pretty much screwed. So eventually Jacob agrees to send Benjamin only after his son Judah assumes personal and eternal responsibility for him. Now, so they take Benjamin and they all go back down to see Joseph again in Egypt, to buy more grain, because at this point the provisions that they had been given they had already tore through them. They had already run out, and the famine was so bad that even in Egypt, everyone was crying out, give us bread lest we die. And because they had stockpiled so well in the 7 previous years, they were able to have bread, so Egypt didn't go hungry. And Egypt had so much abundance that they had saved up that they were actually able to, as we see here, sell grain and rations and supplies to other nations who were starving as well. So this time the brothers again go down to Egypt. They take Benjamin with them, and when they see Joseph again this time, he treats them very kindly and releases Simeon to them, keeping good at his word. He releases Simeon to them and invites them to have dinner in his home. He instructs his servants to slaughter an animal and that they'll dine together at noon. So, all that happens, and he gives them another rations of grain and supplies and everything. And so Joseph he's got to figure out another way to get them to come back again. And as we find out later on, he wants them to this time bring their father Jacob with them as well. So he's got to figure out a way. How does he get them back? So the Torah tells us that Joseph has a silver goblet that was, in one way or another, it tells us that he used it for divination, and it's purportedly infused with some kind of magic. Joseph takes this silver goblet, and he puts it in Benjamin's bag with all of his, belongings and the provisions he gave to him, and then he sends the brothers off on their way the next morning back to Egypt. Then Joseph, kind of pulls the snare on his trap that he worked up, is that he sends his men after them after the brothers had gone a little ways on their trip back to Canaan, and tells them to say that one of you stole our master's goblet, and he wants to know why you would repay his kindness with evil. And obviously the brothers had no idea. So they're like, oh crap, what's happening here? What's going on? We didn't steal anybody's goblet. We didn't steal from anybody. We just came here to get some food so that we can take it back to our home so that, us and our father don't die. So they search all the brothers, belongings that they have with them and all the provisions given them, and they find Joseph's silver goblet, which he had placed in Benjamin's bag. So, all the brothers are like, oh my God, why is this happening to us? It hits them the idea that, this must be God punishing us for what we did to our other youngest brother, Joseph. God is exacting vengeance on us. God is getting even with us for the crime that we did to him. At this point, Reuben quips up and he's like, I told you so. I told you not to harm the boy and to let him go, but it's a little too late for that. They're just like, basically we're reaping what we sow. God is getting even with us. So they're taken back, and Joseph, then what he does, he sets all the brothers free except for Benjamin, under the ruse that, well, you know what? Okay, this one, Benjamin, is the one that stole from me, took my goblet, took from me, so it's only right that I keep him. And our Parsha this week ends with us being told that he keeps Benjamin as his slave. So moving on to the examination of this. What do you guys think? I'll open the floor up to everybody here. What do you guys think? What ideas or lessons or teachings can you see in this, and you think we can draw from this week's Torah portion? The Torah speaks to us even today, thousands of years after these stories happened and were written down and told about, but they still speak to us today, even in the year 2012 CE. They still teach us lessons and everything. What do you guys, anybody, you have any thoughts or any ideas? What is the Torah saying to us today? through this story? What can we draw from that? Anybody? Just pipe up. Let's hear what you have to say. I can personally tell you that I found a list of 6 points when studying over this and reading it that literally jumped off the page at me and practically smacked me in the face. They came through that strong. Anybody have any ideas of what they think God could be telling us? Jonathan says it's difficult. There's an undercurrent of that story that seems to say that Israelite slavery is a result of at least poetic justice for the system that Joseph set up. That is an amazing point, Jonathan. And I'm so glad that you shared it with us. That is just awesome. But you found something. It occurred to you something that didn't even occur to me. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Thank you for that. Anybody else have anything they want to add? Excuse me. Okay, well, I've got, like I said, I found 6 things. Yeah, of course, Jonathan. I mean, it is a good idea. We don't have to like it, but just because you don't like something doesn't always mean just because we don't like something doesn't mean that it isn't always true and isn't valid. It's one of those. I look at it as one of those things that could be seen as maybe an inconvenient or unfortunate truth in a way. Okay, now some of the things that I found, the first point that came to me, and this is maybe you could see it as not generic, but it's it's in almost every bit of Torah that we find. I mean, it's in almost every bit of Torah that we study. And it's first and foremost, it's the pretty obvious one, so we'll get it out of the way first. It's the idea that Hashem is always in charge. He's in charge of everything. And that even when it may seem like that Hashem has abandoned us, he really, really hasn't, and that we shouldn't mistake His silence at certain times. We shouldn't mistake His silence to mean or to see it as His absence, because even though He may be silent, He's always there. He's always still there. We see this in the illustration is that even throughout Joseph's wrongful and punishment in prison, Joseph was pretty much thrown in a dungeon for a crime that he didn't commit, that he was framed for. That's a bad thing to happen. That's a terrible thing to happen to a person. And even through all of that, God was still with him and helping him, shaping human events, pulling some strings for him here and there, disposing everyone around him to treat him with kindness and mercy. Even though God never speaks in this story and in this situation, God never speaks, God never appears, God never speaks, God never appears, but even through His silence, He's still working and He's still, helping and doing things, and He's always with us, even when it appears that, He may be really far away or even absent. He really isn't, and He's always there. Emma adds, on a personal note, I dislike Joseph's machinations. Indirect approaches and underhandedness are not part of my personal ethic. Tracy adds, indeed, he did come off as manipulative and a bit slimy. Yeah, it kind of comes off like, we all know an individual who never, who asks for things or says that they want things without actually coming out and saying, hey, could you do this? Or, hey, I'd like this. It's one of these things where it seems like they maybe hint about it, drop hints and everything, or maybe arranged that certain things happen with an ulterior motive in mind. I can definitely see Joseph's actions being seen that way, because they do come off a little bit, a little bit sneaky, a little bit underhanded, like trying to, pull off certain things like on the side, or like, try to keep his actions on the down low, so that, it happens, but he doesn't actually come out and just be forthright and say, hey, you know what, we should do this, or I need this, or I would like this. Another point that I found in here, and this is again it's kind of generic, and it's an overriding theme throughout all the Torah, but it bears mentioning, is that all things come from God, right? And that you should always remember that and try to give credit where credit is due in a given situation. We see this where here again it's mentioned to Joseph. This time it's the Pharaoh saying it, that it's spoken about how Joseph can interpret dreams. And this is an awesome gift. It's an amazing gift that Joseph has, but Joseph, again, when it's said to him, hey, I hear you can interpret dreams, and his response to Pharaoh is, not I, God can surely interpret for you. Okay, again, it's his gift to have, and it's his gift to use, and he gives all the credit to God for it. We find later in the Tanakh, in the book of Isaiah, where we have God speaking through the prophet Isaiah, where God himself says, I am the Lord thy God, I create the light, I create the dark, I create good, and I create evil. All these things I create. So that's right there telling us that everything comes from God, whether it be good or bad. He has a reason for doing whatever he does, be it good or bad, and that, we should personally try to remember that, when good things happen, remember the one who made those good things, allowed for those good things to happen to you, to befall you, and, give a blessing for it, give thanks, give credit where credit's due. And asks, so it is a response to the problem of evil. It could be seen like that. In our religion, I don't see us as having that much of the idea of the problem of evil, because in the Tanakh, like I just quoted several moments ago, we have God himself literally saying, I create all things. I create the light, I create the dark, I create good, and I create evil. All these things I create, obviously we in our limited finite intellect, we can't understand why God would create and allow evil things to happen, but our minds aren't as brilliant and don't work on the same level as his do. So that's just something we just have to realize that, we're not going to know until the day comes when we're standing before God and we can ask him that, and hopefully he'll answer that. But as for the problem of evil, like I said, that doesn't seem to be as big of an issue or a problem in our faith, because our faith readily admits that while yes, God is great, but God is a lot more like us than other faiths want to admit. It's not, our Tanakh freely says, like I've been saying, that, God creates evil. It is one of the, yes, and it is. This is one of the reasons why I love Judaism so much as well, is because they're just the openness and the honesty about it. Here we have a faith where, is that related to how we are created in his image? Yes, Michael, that is. We are, okay, God creates, and we're told in Isaiah that God creates good and evil. Okay, so like us, like that, which is a creation of God, we are a creation of God as well, and we're taught that God creates each and every one of us with two sides. One side, which is referred to as a Yetzer Tov, which is our inclination towards the good, and the other side is called the Yetzer Hara, which is, I don't want to say it's not like an evil side or an evil impulse, but the rabbis define it and refer to it as being the impulse towards selfishness and selfish actions. Now, both can be used for good purposes. You can channel your Yetzer Hara into goodness. You can take what could be considered a selfish act and find a way to use it towards good. That's your channeling your Yetzer Hara towards the good. It comes with the idea of taking that which is in darkness and bringing it into light. With our faith, the problem of evil isn't so much a big thing because, well, yes, our God is holy and our God is great. We don't as much uphold the idea of a God who is completely spotless. I know in Christianity, it's the idea of God doing anything that we could be considered wrong or evil. To that, it's completely unheard of to them and totally blasphemous to them. That's why they had to invent an arch enemy of God, who they call the devil or Satan or Lucifer or whatever. They had to invent that to justify the idea of where, if God is so good and God is so perfect, what's with this problem of evil? Essentially, why do bad things happen to good people? We don't have to, our faith, we don't have to worry about that as much because we know and we understand that all things come from God, even evil things, and that, it can kind of suck that God does evil things and has to do evil things, but ultimately we have to trust and understand that, because our minds don't work on the same way that he does, and his thoughts are not the same as ours, that, he obviously, for whatever reason, even letting something evil happen, there's a greater purpose in it, and he has some reason for letting it happen that, hopefully a greater good can come from it. So, getting back to the main, because also I love when we can get into these little side discussions here too, because I think it just adds so much more to share, and it's just totally awesome, I think. Another point that I found from this week's Parsha is it hints on an idea that we also later find later on in the Tanakh, that we find this one way in the back in the Ketuvim in the book of Job. And this is the idea that what God may take away, he often replaces and at times even does restore it. Okay, we see this with Joseph here. He's given a wife named Asenath. He marries her. He has two sons with her. And as I said before, their names are Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, it's interesting, the name of Manasseh means God has made me forget my hardship. Let me try this again. Manasseh means that God has made me forget completely my hardship and my paternal home. And then Ephraim means God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. So this speaks to us of the idea that Joseph's pain and sorrow of, the home life he had, growing up in Jacob's house where, he was even though he was showered with attention and affection because he was the favorite, his brothers were pretty rotten to him. Obviously so, if they plotted to kill him and did all the the awful things that they did to him, his home life couldn't have been that great. And Joseph's pain and sorrow, Joseph's pain and sorrow of his home life in Jacob's household, and the cruelty of his brother's treatment, basically, taking Joseph's family away from him by selling him off into slavery, basically getting rid of him. That all these things, in a way, have been erased, and that, that pain and sorrow and that hurt has been replaced with joy and happiness now, which comes to Joseph from his new wife, who he loves very much, and through the new family of his own that he has, his wife and his 2 sons that have been given to him by God. The next point that I found, this one I think is interesting because it almost speaks of like the Torah in a way, giving us a really, really good economics lesson. Okay, where it speaks of the 7 years of abundance and plenty, followed by the 7 years of famine. And this can be interpreted today, and this speaks to us of the idea that, one can never allow oneself to get too comfortable in one's successes. The idea is that, you may be living in the lap of luxury today, at this moment, right now, but that in no way is any guarantee that it's going to be the exact same tomorrow. What you lavish in today could be completely gone tomorrow, or even in an hour from now. You never know. It tells us that, should always take time and take measures to prepare for the future, as Joseph had all of Egypt do when, during the 7 years of plenty, they could have been living large. They could have been having great feasts every night and parties every day and everything. Instead, they took a more conservative approach, and they, made sure that they were stockpiling and saving, because they knew what was about to come once the 7 years of bountiful harvest ended. The idea is that, things may be good now. Things may be good today. They may be really great today. But, no one can know about tomorrow. What about tomorrow? Or next week, or next month, or next year, or as in the case of Egypt, of the next 7 years. Just because things are really good and really awesome and bountiful right now, that is in no way, no guarantee that things are going to be just as epic tomorrow. Today may be epically awesome, and tomorrow might be horrible. And that is a very real possibility. So you have to always take the time to prepare in every means necessary, so that your abundance and your goodness today will be able to sustain you should things not be so good tomorrow, or the day after, or next week, or next month, or next year. A fifth point that I found, that came to me, that I found, is that teaches us hints at the idea that you should always be truthful and honest in all of your dealings. Here we have, when Joseph's brothers came before him, we have them, while not recognizing Joseph as the governor of Egypt, they didn't recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. Okay, and that they're 10 of his 12, they're 10 of his 11 other brothers. And that, they were kind of telling the brothers were kind of telling half-truths at this point, because they were telling the truth when they said that our youngest brother remains at home with our father, and they said that they told Joseph that, he says, well, what of your other brother? And they're like, well, he's no more. They don't really know that he is no more. For all, in their minds, he very well could be dead somewhere. He could be no more. Or he could also be, alive somewhere as a slave, because they sold him off to slavery. Honestly, they're not really lying per se, but it's the idea of, telling a half truth. They're only being, partially, not 100% truthful with Joseph. And when they say he's no more, they don't know. They honestly don't know, so they're telling their half truth. And obviously Joseph, who's pulling this little switcheroo here on them, he knows that they're not telling the truth, and in essence, he sort of calls them on it with his actions. He sort of calls them on it in a way. It speaks to us and tells us of the idea that even today that it's always a good idea to be open and honest and forthright in all your dealings. When you come into any dealings with anybody, whether they be business, financial, otherwise, whatever, it's usually and most often a really good idea that you be totally honest and open and upfront about everything, and that you'd be willing to lay your cards all on the table, because usually, most of the time, and hopefully, that honesty that you display and you give and you put out, hopefully that will tend to beget honesty back to you. Basically, it's like you get what you give thing. If you're honest and open in dealing with someone, hopefully they'll be inclined to return just as much openness and honesty and forthrightness to you. And the final point that I found before we draw this to a close is, as our Parsha for this week draws to a close, we have Benjamin being found in possession of Joseph's silver goblet. Joseph uses this as a reason to keep Benjamin in Egypt. And we hear the remaining brothers start, winning and crying, and they're bemoaning amongst themselves that, they're somehow being punished, that God is punishing them for their actions of what they did to Joseph all those years ago. They still believe that Joseph is either a slave somewhere or possibly dead, and they know that the guilt is on them for it, and they believe that God is finally enacting some kind of retribution, that God getting even for Joseph, that God is punishing them. Okay, the idea that this tells us and pervades us and speaks to us, to me, it's one of the most important ideas in all of our faith. Okay, and it's an idea that's so important that the great Rabbi Maimonides, he found this idea so important that he included it in one of his 13 articles of Jewish faith. And this is the idea that God rewards good and just and righteous deeds and punishes wrongful deeds, misdeeds, and evil doings. Okay. Now, the fact that the brothers, while they're still alive and they're still in their lives and everything, and they're like, "Oh, God must be punishing us. This must be our punishment." That speaks to us the idea, which is it's a very uniquely Jewish idea in a way, is that yes, while God does reward righteous and meritorious deeds and good deeds, and He does punish misdeeds and evil acts and wrong, sinful acts and everything, He does it. He does it in this life. Basically, God either rewards you or gets you back in this life while you're still alive. Because honestly, there's not a whole lot of attention paid to any kind of afterlife, or a lot of thought given to us. There is mention of a place called Sheol. It's mentioned several times in our Parsha this week as being a kind of abode of the dead, but there isn't. That's all it really is said to a large degree about any kind of afterlife. So the idea of God's divine justice being handed out accordingly, it pertains to, and as the brothers knew here, stands as a testament that that is what is taught and what is believed. It stands as a testament to show that, God's actions, His rewards, His punishments are given to us and handed out to us while we're alive here, now, in this life. God doesn't wait till after you die to then give you one great reward or one great punishment. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially to a mind as amazingly and unfathomably brilliant as God, to give you one huge lump sum punishment or reward for one life, knowing that during the event of that life, you may have done some really, really awesome, great, kind, wonderful things. And then also because, we have a Yetzer Hara too, we may have done some selfish things. We may have done some things that are bad. Some people even do things that could be considered downright evil. Everyone does a little bit of A and a little bit of B, and it doesn't really make sense to give you one group everlasting punishment for finite acts of kindness or finite acts of evil or sin. It's kind of like, I've seen in Egyptian artwork and Egyptian hieroglyphics, it's depicted where they have a scale, and that on one side of the scale, all the righteous deeds that a man has done in his life is placed on one side, and all the evil deeds that he's done is placed on the other side of the scale. And depending on which way the scale tips determines whether or not they get rewarded or punished in the afterlife. That idea where it's a very human attempt to try to explain things, but the idea is that God is always watching us. God is always judging our misdeeds, and sometimes if we're being punished for a deed that we do, it's not so much like a punishment. Yeah, it can be seen as one, but at the same time, it's more like how a parent will, punish their child, but not to exact vengeance upon the child, but to correct them and to, through that punishment, to, encourage them to not do whatever they did that was wrong or bad again, and to more guide them back on the right path. Emma says, and he might just punish you through your own conscience. There's a saying, the guilty dog barks first. If you think about it, the brothers were convinced because of their own lingering feelings of guilt, not because of a literal external guilt. That is so good, Emma. Thank you. That is brilliant, and that's totally true. I've heard many people say in one way or another, and many people I've heard say this, and people from all walks of life and all faiths, whether they be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, I've heard them all speak of the idea of your conscience, as you said, Emma, and that your conscience is actually the voice of God talking to you. If you do something wrong, and it's wrong, and the first thing that hits you, before any other, punishment or bad fate or bad karma or whatever you want to call it, before any of that befalls you, if you feel guilty, if you have that little, metaphorically speaking, if you have that little voice in your head that won't shut up and keeps gnawing at you and letting you know, hey, you know what, you shouldn't have done that, maybe you need to make amends for that, that's the very voice of God, basically stepping in and being like, hey, you know what, you shouldn't have done that, you need to fix this. Emma says they could have interpreted the discovery of the cup in many ways or tried to find another explanation, but they immediately went to God is punishing us. Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of times having a guilty conscience will make you very quickly, when pressed and when you believe you're caught, blurt out the proof of the reason why you have such a guilty conscience. I think, though, that it just going back to our points here, it is really, really awesome and interesting to entertain the idea and to really think the idea is that there's no getting away with anything. That God's always watching, and I don't mean to sound like in some giant cosmic tattletale type way. I mean it's more in like the idea of, imagine like the greatest, most kind and loving parent, loving father you could ever have. God wants us to do right. God wants us to show loving kindness to all of His creation, everyone is our brothers and sisters, as we're all children of Hashem. And God wants us to walk in His ways and show kindness to all of them. And when we don't, I guess the punishments we get are Him, maybe trying to steer us back along the way. And also, it kind of works as a sort of, negative reinforcement, where you won't do something again that you shouldn't have done if the first time you did it, you got caught and suffered in some way for it, or had to do some type of penance for it, or suffered some repercussion. You're less apt and less likely to do that same action again if you know the consequences of it. I personally can say, and I've had this happen many times in my life, that I've experienced, I don't want to say seen, but I've experienced the literal hand of God and experienced God working in my life and moving in and through my life. And there have been times where I wholeheartedly believe that, I'm not perfect, just like anybody else. We've all done some things in our life that we wish we shouldn't have, and maybe we knew we shouldn't have done, but whatever gets the best of us, and we do it anyways. I personally have seen the action of God and felt the hand of God, and I have dealt with and been punished for doing certain things that I maybe shouldn't have done that were displeasing to God. On the other hand, many times I've felt God's blessings raining down on my life, raining down on me and my home, because I've worked hard at being a good person, being the person God expects me to be, being the Jew that God expects me to be, and I have rewards of that. And it's just an amazing, awesome thing when you can live that and experience that. And it really does have a ring of truth to it, and it really does touch and influence your life. And with that goodness, I will begin to draw everything to a close here this evening. Let's see what's going on in the chat room here real quick, because during my last ramble there I missed. Okay. For myself, the voice of my conscience has become much louder since I chose to convert to Judaism. I see this as a good thing. Emma, you are so right. I feel the exact same way. I converted to Judaism from originally being an atheist and being raised in a very militant atheist home by very militant atheist families who were just, by atheist parents, I meant to say, who were, completely opposed to any and all idea of God and the idea of God's existence and whatever, Anytime any mention of it was brought up, the only response you get is, "Oh, that's stupid. Only stupid, weak people believe in God." So that's what I came from, and I was lucky to find out, for me, how wrong I was to follow that and believe that. And yeah, ever since I converted to Judaism, once I converted and started really, truly keeping the faith and living in God's ways and walking in God's ways, that little voice in my head popped up, that little conscience, that where, if I would do something beforehand, before I converted, before I found God and came to know God, I would just do it and like, whatever. And then I found, little things that I would do now, I would do, and it'd do that whole I'd hear like in my ear, like, hey, Bri, shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done that. Guess what? I'm not going to let you sleep tonight because I'm going to keep you awake thinking about it. So I see that still as definitely a really good thing. And Tracy adds, and we should be easy on ourselves when we do wrong because we aren't perfect. Amen to that. We are not perfect. We're far from it. Hence the trend in some circles to stroke or tap your heart during the reciting of sins at Yom Kippur, rather than beating your chest as is traditional. Exactly, Tracy. Also, I know that we strike our chests during when we're saying Amidah as well. It's a symbolic. I see it as a symbolic measure of that. Yes, you are in a way beating yourself up for doing something that maybe you shouldn't have done, but you're only beating yourself up softly, where you're just like, instead of like boom hitting your chest, you're just like, tap tap tap. It's symbolic of both, punishing yourself and beating yourself up, but because you're doing it gently, it's also symbolic to me of forgiving yourself at the same time and saying, hey, I'm not perfect. I do make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes in the future. I'm going to try not to, but we're not God. We don't make mistakes. We're not God. We do make mistakes. Whoops. And it's also, just by doing it gently, you symbolize, you're forgiving yourself, and God is forgiving you too. Okay, and with that, it brings us to the time where I, real quick, I'll just ask you guys for a donation. If you come here to any classes at one shul, if you enjoy it, if you're touched by it, if you learn anything from it, whether it be a class here, our Torah study class, or any of our holiday services or Shabbat services, we ask that you donate $5. Not a whole heck of a lot, but if everyone gives at least $5, that adds up, and then we can keep one shul going for pretty much as long as everybody keeps giving and keeps donating. So that's that. Okay, as we going to bring this to a close here, I'd like to wish everybody here just a wonderful, wonderful, and happy remaining 5 nights of Hanukkah. I hope that your first 2 nights have been amazing and just filled with blessings and love and joy and happiness. And I hope and wish for you nothing less for the remaining evenings. If anyone else has any questions or anything they want to say, speak now or forever hold your peace, or at least until next week. I'll be back with you guys again every Monday night at this time for the foreseeable future. So come spend some time with me, and thank you so much for spending this past hour of your third night of Hanukkah with me. It was really just an honor and a joy to be here with all of you guys. Anybody else have any questions or anything they'd like to add? I will sign off here on the video, but I'll just get everything set over on the video side, and then I'll hang out a little bit in the chat. Oh, looks like all quiet. Alrighty then, so again, it was just great being here with you all. God bless you, each and every one of you guys. I love you all. Thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful wonderful, there we go. Have a wonderful, wonderful Hanukkah. God bless you, everybody. Good night.